Those truths are our common sense. The problem is the world we live in mitigates against our remembering what is common sense. It's not common sense that we kill each other the way we do. Right? It's not common sense that we're destroying the planet. It's not common sense that we're not feeding the children. You know what I'm saying? So the Course says that the truth of who we are is love. And when we are in our right mind, Gandhi once said the problem with the world is that humanity is not in its right mind. The right mind, the righteous mind, means right use of the mind, is love. That who you are is love, that you are here to love. And the Course in Miracles says that the world we live in is dominated and has been dominated.
I'd like to welcome to the show Marianne Williamson. How you doing, Marianne?
I'm doing well. Thank you. Thank you for having me on your show.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. I greatly appreciate it. I've been a fan of yours for quite some time. I saw you speak, I think it was in 2020 at Mind Valley,
Okay.
uh, in
Vision.
LA, in LA, yeah, with Vision. So I remember really being moved by what you were saying there. So I'm
Thank you.
really excited to talk to you. So my very first question is, what was the pivotal point in your life that led you down a spiritual path, or at least exploring the spiritual path?
I don't really subscribe to the eureka theory
Okay.
of spiritual evolution. First of all, I want to say, I think everybody's on a spiritual path. Most people
Mhm.
just don't know it. That's really all
Mhm.
that life is. I just matured as a person, went through things as a person, no different than anyone else. Um, the sort of banal quality of what it really is about, to me, is more attractive than
Mhm.
this idea of, I got it. Because
Mhm.
every moment you either get it or you don't. I'm hardly an enlightened master.
Mhm.
But what I did, like everyone else, was go through enough experiences where I sort of crashed into walls, and you start to, you start to learn, well, maybe that's not the way to do it. You know, the Course in Miracles says it's not up to you what you learn, it's merely up to you whether you learn through joy or through pain. And I, like everyone, got to a point where learning through pain was just too painful.
Mhm.
Not that I don't still learn through pain sometime, but I don't do it. I do it where there's a genuine blind spot and I just don't get it until it's over, as opposed to the way I used to just sort of irresponsibly just when I was young, just behave so recklessly with myself and with others, perhaps.
Now, you mentioned the Course in Miracle. Can you explain what the Course in Miracle, or what it is and where it came from for people who are not familiar with it?
The Course in Miracles is a system, it's been referred to as a system of spiritual self-study program of spiritual psychotherapy. What's important to remember is it's not a religion.
Mhm.
It's a psychological mind training in relinquishing thoughts of fear and accepting thoughts of love. It's based on universal spiritual themes. I think of truth with a capital T as one.
Mhm.
But there are many different religions, many different paths, many different, some spiritual, some religious, some secular. The paths that point to the heart and that reconnect us to a more heart-centered way of life. So the Course in Miracles isn't any better or worse than any other book or teaching,
Mhm.
but it was one that made a tremendous difference in my life. And then I started lecturing on those books and then wrote a book based on it and then had a writing career that came from that and a nonprofit activist career that grew out of the talks that I gave and all that kind of thing.
Where did the Course of Miracles come from? Like, who wrote it?
Two clinical psychology professors at Columbia University between 1966 and 1971, which 1965, I think, which fascinates me because
Mhm.
that was the period of time when there was all the student
Mhm.
turmoil at Columbia University. So right around the corner from Low Library that the students, they occupied it, and right around the corner. So I've always found that quite fascinating.
Now, I've heard, from my understanding, that Jesus was involved or Jesus's teachings are involved in Course of Miracles. Is that accurate? Is it not accurate?
Well, you would have to answer the question for yourself when and if you read the book. There
Mhm.
is no author listed on the cover of the book. Now, sometimes you see that today. It's not even that uncommon. But at that time, when I first saw the course in the mid 70s,
Mhm.
no, no author. Like, well, what is this? Um, the power of the book does not lie in who you think wrote it. The
Okay.
power of the book lies in whether or not you practice the principles. And the principles are the universal principles in all the great religious systems of the world, whether or not you're forgiving, whether or not you choose to look at someone's innocence rather than their guilt,
Mhm.
whether or not you choose to realize that only what you are not giving can be lacking in any situation, whether or not you're willing to take 100% responsibility for your own experience. Um, whether or not you choose to think there is a guidance system, an internal guidance system, a radar of the heart that is a part of the mind that truly knows more than you do when you are locked within a limited, constricted frame of comfort of reference based on your sense of yourself as separate from others, separate from a higher power, separate from the earth. Things that we all, you read enough books, you get what the principles are, then the point has to do with the often very difficult path of practically applying them to our daily circumstances. And one of the things about the course that's so fantastic is that there's a workbook. So if you just read the text, you become very, sophisticated in your ability to articulate spiritual principle. But if anybody can tell you that's the least of it, it's me.
Mhm.
If it was as simple as that, I'd probably be, but it's not. It's we are all confronted every really minute, every hour of our and day of our lives to, every situation, and this is from the course, it says every situation is a lesson faithfully rehearsed. So everything that happens, you've been here before.
Mhm.
And how'd you play it last time? Were you
Mhm.
good? Be at least that good this time.
Mhm.
Were you not your best? Okay, got a chance to make it up. Do it better this time.
Simple as that.
Mm-hmm.
So when you were first introduced to the book, what was it like when you first started reading that first time when you started reading the book? What happened to you that these words, out of all the spiritual texts in the world, really drew you in? What was about this information and the way it was presented that brought you in and really you dedicated your much of your life to these teachings?
The image I had was, imagine a huge cathedral. And in front of the huge cathedral are these stone steps, big, tall stone steps. I had read a lot. Um, like you said, I'd read many books. And I felt that I was trying to get into the cathedral.
Mhm.
And I was climbing up those steps. And sometimes my elbows were bloodied, my knees were bloodied. I kept trying to get up there. But I had this recurring image. And the recurring image was that I got to the top of the steps, and there are these big doors at the front of the cathedral, and I start trying to get in, and it's locked. I was at the cathedral. I was making every effort to climb, but once I got there, the door was locked. And what the course gave me was the realization that the key is in how I think of and treat other people, the person right in front of you. I'm not saying that's the first place where I read it, but it's the first place where I got it.
That was the
It's all
first.
about people, other people, other people, other people.
And the ideas that are presented in the Course of Miracles are just the simple truths that are common in all great spiritual traditions around the world, correct?
Absolutely. And those truths are our common sense. The problem is the world we live in mitigates against our remembering what is common sense. It's not common sense that we kill each other the way we do. Right? It's not common sense that we're destroying the planet. It's not common sense that we're not feeding the children. You know what I'm saying? So the Course says that the truth of who we are is love. And when we are in our right mind, Gandhi once said the problem with the world is that humanity is not in its right mind. The right mind, the righteous mind, means right use of the mind, is love. That who you are is love, that you are here to love. And the Course in Miracles says that the world we live in is dominated and has been dominated for a very, very, very long time by a thought system based on fear,
Right.
which is the absence of love. So the Course in Miracles says that enlightenment, light means understanding, coming to understand is a process not of learning, but of unlearning, unlearning fear. I have a 7.5-month-old granddaughter, and watching a baby,
Mm-hmm.
they haven't experienced lovelessness yet.
Mm-hmm.
Just her beaming of joy and laughter, and she hasn't seen anything else yet. Another one I notice is with her body. I'll notice when my daughter sends me pictures of her husband holding the baby, and how the baby just like lies back in her father's arms. Her body has no defensiveness yet, has no experience, any cellular sense of what could be dangerous. It's so magnificent.
Yeah, it's sometimes animals have that as well.
That's
There's a purity and an innocence to them that they've never had anyone mistreat them. So they're just completely trusting. And children are like that until if
until
and when until something happens that changes their programming and their
that's exactly right.
association to the world.
Right.
What advice would you have for people that are that their programming, their framing of reality is based on fear, and that they see everything with a fearful lens? How can they break free from that and open into a world of love?
Well, all of us, to some extent,
Yeah, of
are
course.
bound by the chains of fear.
Sure.
All of us. And the greatest way that we can, the Course in Miracles says to teach is to demonstrate. The greatest way you can help free someone else from their own fear is to free yourself from yours.
Right.
It's a full-time job monitoring our own process. The ego mind is very big on looking at other people where, they're not doing it right. Our job is to make sure that we are.
In the time that you've been, from when you discovered these teachings to where you are now, even in my lifetime, I have seen humanity shift, consciousness rise from my point of view. Things that were completely acceptable in the 50s, 60s, and 70s now are not. There is an evolution. Where do you see our consciousness going? Do you agree with that statement that humanity is kind of evolving and hopefully raising their consciousness into a level of love?
I think humanity is evolving and devolving simultaneously. I think there are two parallel universes.
Mm.
One world is crumbling, one world is falling apart. And as it does, a lot of people who are attached to that reality as the only reality are experiencing actually more fear and are holding on even more tightly. So as that world crumbles, there's even greater fear. Simultaneously, there's a new world struggling to be born, the rising that you're talking about. So it's like we're called to be both death doulas and birth doulas,
Mm.
to help one world that needs to pass away more gently, and another world come forth. Now, even within this phase of consciousness rising, whoever we are, wherever we are, including a movement, what's the work of the moment? Now, I've written 15 books, and I was like an early pioneer in those books and all that kind of stuff. So I've watched a trajectory.
Mhm.
I think that there has been a rising up of easy spirituality.
Mm.
Spirituality that might not be easy in terms of the inner work that we have to do, but there's no spiritual or religious tradition anywhere that gives any of us a pass on addressing the suffering of other sentient beings. So I think that there's a way in which the spiritual higher consciousness community found capitalism.
Stop it, Marianne. Stop it. Really? Shocking.
Mhm. And there's that limit where people supposedly talking about spiritual things don't want to say anything that might hurt their brand, let's say. So I think even in this world where things are rising, we always have to look within ourselves for where the temptation is to lower.
Any of these dictators of the last 150 years in any of the world wars, what instead of looking at them, we have to look at the environment that allowed someone like them to come up.
That's
And
exactly.
that's a much more difficult question because it looks inward at you. You start pointing back at you and your community and the world as opposed to focusing all the wrongs on a person. Does that make sense?
Well, yes, of course. However, even where it's not difficult, there
Mm-hmm.
is resistance to doing it because if you really learn the lesson of that history, which once again might not be so difficult in certain cases, to
Mm-hmm.
learn that history and to apply the lesson would be to upset the apple cart of how you're functioning. I'll give you an example.
Mm-hmm.
After World War One, and contrary to the expressed opinion of our own president, Woodrow Wilson,
Mm-hmm.
Allies made reparations for Germany after the war. Deutschmark till we tell you to stop, basically.
Mm-hmm.
The Allies crushed the German people. The German people, being so crushed, became an easy target for Adolf
Mm-hmm.
Hitler. We
Mm-hmm.
didn't make that mistake after World War II. We had learned the lesson. The Marshall Plan helped Japan get back on its feet, helped Germany get back on its feet. A vanquished enemy is dangerous. Large groups of desperate people are dangerous. Now, history says that. History says that large groups of desperate people, in such examples as I just gave you, by the way, Gaza's another example.
Mm-hmm.
We have the examples. Large groups of desperate people become a petri dish out of which all manner of societal and personal dysfunction are almost inevitable. And that includes ideological capture by genuinely psychotic forces. I read an interview with Jared Kushner. It was
Mm-hmm.
after Trump had been elected, and I think it was in Rolling Stone magazine.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that he was at a McDonald's with his father-in-law. And he looked around the restaurant and he said to his father-in-law, there are a lot of angry people in this country, and we could harness all that and make you president. Too many people whose it's not working. And that's what Franklin Roosevelt said. He said, we would not have to worry about a fascist takeover as long as democracy delivered on its promises. There are too many people for whom democracy did not deliver, and it has not and is not delivering on its promises.
No, but let's go back to the Course in Miracles. What is one of the biggest misconceptions that people have of the Course in Miracles that you would love to just say? I'd like
Probably
to set
that
the
it's
record
a
straight.
religion.
Oh,
That it's
okay.
a religion. It's not a religion. There's no doctrine. There's no dogma.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing like that. It's written with a tone of just thought you might like to know. The idea here is that we know that there are objective, discernible laws of the external world. Let's
Mm-hmm.
say if I open my hand right now, this glass will fall onto the table and possibly break.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
If you believe gravity is a law.
but that's kind of my point.
Sure.
If I if I say that to you, you don't say, oh, she has so much faith in the power of gravity. It's really moving. I don't have faith in the power of gravity. I know the power of gravity. The idea here is that there are objective, discernible laws of internal phenomenon, such as cause and effect on the outside, and cause and effect on the inside.
Mm-hmm.
So it's simply not trying to tell you that you should believe that every thought creates form on some level. It's just thought you might like to know. So there's no doctrine, no dogma, but there is a profound articulation of principles of the mind And
Mm.
when you're talking about the principles of the mind and you're talking about principles of the spirit, they're ultimately the same thing because the spirit is the loving mind.
Mm.
And so to say that you are spirit is to say the truth of who you are is your loving mind.
You mentioned a term that I absolutely love, the easy spirituality, and the how spirituality has found commerce in many ways. Being in this space and speaking to so many people in the spiritual space, and just being part of the spiritual community for the last 30 years, buying books, buying courses, things like that. There's a lot of sales of like quick and easy spirituality. But when you start to read the deeper books, the deeper teachings of
That's the
what it
course of
right, what it really takes, the inner work, the hard work, what can you talk to people, what can you say to people who might have fallen in the trap of easy spirituality and the ego trap of spirituality, saying, I'm more spiritual than you. I'm the most spiritual. It's like I'm humble. I'm the humblest that you've ever met.
yeah. Spiritual superiority is a real shadow element. The idea I'm spiritual and you're not. And that leads you, by the way, to a forgiveness that's not true forgiveness. You're a jerk, but I'm spiritual, so I forgive you. Whereas the Course in Miracles would say that real forgiveness is realizing the innocent in you is the truth of who you are, because that's who God created you to be. The innocent in me is the truth of who I am, because that is how God created me to be. That nothing you've ever done that is not love is the truth of who you are, or even has ultimate effects if I am willing to let it go. That's work. There's a line in the Course, do you prefer to be right or to be happy? You almost feel like to forgive another person that way, to say, well, it genuinely doesn't matter what you did. Because if it's not love, it will not have ultimate and permanent effects unless I hold on to it. Boy, there's profound ego resistance to that. But the Course in Miracles says your good intentions are not enough. Your willingness is everything. So that's the Course. Are you willing? Are you willing? I'm willing to see this differently. Are you willing to see the innocence in your brother? Because the Course says if you bring the focus on someone's guilt that you had 5 minutes ago into the present, then you're going to create a future is a reflection of your belief in that person's guilt. And if I believe in their guilt, then I will experience the world in which their guilt affected me. The Course in Miracles says you are heir to the laws of the world that you believe in. So I can do that. And also you can get a lot of approval and support these days for playing your violin. Let me tell you how wounded I was. Let me tell you how traumatized I was. We can all do that. But there's a point at which processing those things becomes spewing.
Right.
There's a point where learning from all those things becomes self-indulgence. The issue is the alchemy of spiritual transformation, the work of atoning for our own mistakes, forgiving others for theirs. Also, one of the big ones tied to that is the Course says you have to take 100% responsibility for your own life experience. And if you don't, then the price you will pay is that you won't be able to change it. So I'll give you an example.
Mm-hmm.
When I was talking to you over the last 3 minutes, I was thinking about someone.
Mm-hmm.
However, then when I said, yeah, and taking full responsibility, which is, what was your part in that? Why was your space even vulnerable to that person's entrance? At what point did you allow yourself to counter your own knowing? And in that place where you felt you had no choice, let's look at that again. Might you have? To what extent did you give something over? It's so easy to make it about their guilt
Mm.
rather than how they even get in the room or whatever. And so that goes back to what we were saying before. Everything that happens is perfect for what we need to learn.
But Marianne, you're asking people to take, responsibility of their own lives. That seems a lot.
I just know in my own life experience
Sure.
Failure to do so just means I just keep hitting, once again, you just will
The wall.
keep the same situations in different towns
Hmm.
and people until we learn it, because that's all that's going on here.
So
Like, if
the
you're on a spiritual path, whether you think you're on one or not, life is confronting you constantly with the lessons of self-actualization.
So yeah, so when you were so like when we were younger and let's say we were dating the wrong person and it just kept coming again and again and the same things, these same elements that you didn't like kept showing up in people you were dating. And I used to tell people, "Hey, is it them or is it time to like maybe you're the common denominator in this?"
And sometimes it's just going back to the same person. Once you
Oh,
know, it's not going to be any different, which also is relevant to why would you vote for Biden or Trump again? It's
right.
no different. It works collectively the same way. All the politicians representing a certain system do. It's like a boyfriend who cheats on you, and every 4 years they come back, oh, baby, give me one more chance.
Hmm.
I was saying to somebody the other day, so many of us in our individual lives, we've all read the same books now. We've
Hmm.
all listened to the same tapes. I
Hmm.
wouldn't stand for an abusive relationship, and I'm going to set boundaries, and I'm not going to stay in that toxic relationship. Oh, really? Then why are you remaining in that relationship, the abusive relationship you have with a government that is enabling food companies, big food companies,
Yeah.
to put carcinogen in your food? What could be a more abusive relationship? And that you continue to
Yeah.
enable this if you vote for them more. So, I think so much of what the personal growth and recovery and higher consciousness and spiritual and wellness community has learned, even though it has kept itself sort of apolitical, I always feel like we're the last people who should be sitting out those questions. Because if you have a clue of how those internal dynamics happen in one person's life, you're the one who knows what to change, how to change the world, because all that the country is a group of people. It's the
Mm.
same principles being played out collectively.
Are these the systems that are stuck to the old ways and holding on and kind of like the last death rattle of what's happening, whether it's food, whether it's government, whether it's the medical industry, whether it's pharmaceutical industry, whether it's all of that stuff. These are these old systems that are not serving the people anymore and honestly haven't served the people for quite some time. And these new systems are starting to come up, but they're trying to fight against it.
Well, even very literally, look at big oil. They've known
Mhm.
for decades. They've known for decades this damage would be here. And they know now that this fossil fuel extraction stuff, it is, it's on its way out ultimately, but they want to squeeze every last dollar,
Realize dollar.
squeeze every last dollar out before something happens. And what should happen, in my belief, is an American president who says it stops here.
Mm. Yeah, or someone finally figures out free energy of some sort,
What?
technology. Someone who figures out free energy of some sort of technology that,
That unless it makes them money, that wasn't, we have the people who understand technologically how to do it. We do not lack the knowledge. And by the way, that's not just in green energy, that's in everything. So you go back to the world falling apart, the world struggling to be born. We have in every single area, food, agriculture, education, business, energy, world affairs. We have everything. We have in every field,
mm,
either here or in somewhere else in the world, but a lot here as well, the people who are already demonstrating a new kind of best practices, who are already demonstrating the alternative to the old way. The problem is that the people with those solutions don't have the power. And the people with the power don't always want to hear from the solution. So when you just said, or somebody figures it out technologically, often someone who figures out how to do it differently is the biggest pariah in the eyes of the old order. And I see that in my presidential run. Oh, she's talking about how to do it different. She would upset the corporate apple cart. Don't let her in. Invisibilize her, erase her, knock her off ballots.
mhm, mhm. But
And it,
also though, but also now more than ever, there is opportunity through technology to get information out like this conversation, that would have normally had to go through a gatekeeper. And now it doesn't. It's basically you get into millions of people, access to hopefully millions of people in this conversation, where before you would absolutely have to be in go through a gatekeeper, guard yourself, make sure you don't say the wrong thing or it won't be air or these kind of things. So there is movement towards that. And I think it's, again, these new systems that are coming up and the old systems trying to hold on to but I think something like the internet, you can't wrangle in the internet now. It's too late, I think.
Well, of course, there are two things
Still
there.
trying.
First of all, that is the conversation going on, the sort of free speech on the internet inquiry, but also in terms of political change. You can't, it's impossible to overestimate, to overstate the importance of mainstream media channels. For younger people, like for instance, in my race, I can get to younger people because they're on TikTok,
Sure.
and that
And on
doesn't
YouTube.
thing.
Yeah, and on YouTube.
But if CNN is blacklisting you and MSNBC is blacklisting you, those people's parents don't even know you're running.
Right.
So for younger people, yeah, but as important as they are in terms of a demographic and everything else, there are other people on the planet too who are getting the news from mainstream media.
Well, without question, yeah.
And also on the internet, the level of misrepresentation, manipulation,
Oh,
smear is
massive.
disturbing.
Yeah, it's with any new technology. It's a hammer could kill or a hammer could build. It's always like that with every tool.
Yeah, the Course in Miracles says nothing in the material world is holy or unholy, except as determined by the purpose that the mind is using it for. Exactly like you said, the internet is a perfect example. It's extraordinary how helpful it can be and extraordinary how dangerous it can be.
No,
And now with AI.
yeah, and that's a whole other can. That's people are still trying to figure it. I feel like AI is very much where we were in 1996 with the internet. It just nobody really knew it was the wild wild west. Things were happening so fast, and I think AI is just happening even faster than the internet did because technology is faster. I just don't really know where it's all going to go. There, you could see the potential of good. You could also see the potential for not so good.
You can see the reality of good,
Mm-hmm.
and the potential of negative is terrifying.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, let me ask you, what role do you believe spirituality plays in politics, in governance, in social leadership?
The word politics comes from the root politeia.
Mm-hmm.
Politeia means of the people. All that politics is our collective behavior. So all we're talking about here is if the spiritual path, which is nothing but the path of the heart, is core to right living individually, the path of the heart, compassion, love, mercy, justice, should also be the core, the ideal in our collective experience as well. You're so religious, how could you be involved in politics? He said, is not politics part of Dharma too? Now, I wrote a book that came out at the late 90s called Healing the Soul of America. What I was interested in was the intersection of spirituality and politics.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea, Marianne, that's not a wheel anybody has to invent. It was Mahatma Gandhi. He articulated a principle of spiritual political philosophy called nonviolence. Dr. King visited India, learned those principles, and brought them back to apply to the struggle for civil rights in the United States in the 1960s. So, and much of what Gandhi was articulating, he had gotten from the American Transcendentalists, from Thoreau, and from the Quakers quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
So Quakers, the idea of an inner light within every man, woman, and child. Now, you can also call that the Christ. You can also call it the Buddha mind. You can call it the Shekinah, but the
Mm-hmm.
inner light within every man, woman, and child. So what Gandhi said, that inner light not only heals personal relationships, it heals social, economic, and political relationships as well. And then Dr. King said about Gandhi that he was the first person in history, he said, to take the ethic of love beyond mere personal interaction
Mhm.
so that it could become a broad scale social force for good. So we know that hatred is turned into a social
Mhm.
force for evil. That's what terrorism is. That's what ISIS is. That's what Hamas is. We need to counter that by turning love into a social and political force. And that's what the Indian independence movement was. That's what the civil rights movement was. And it's the only, I think it's the only thing that will save us now.
You mentioned before that we all need to do the right thing and do the inner work within ourselves. But how can we forgive? Because so many people have a problem. You say, forgive the person. We were talking about forgiving the person, but looking inward at yourself. For someone who is listening to this conversation right now and it is blowing their mind, it is like a nuclear bomb going off in their head, and they don't even know where to begin to do the inner work. What advice would you give them?
Well, first of all, there are two things. Number one, who do you need to forgive? And if you would, forgiveness is the most powerful force in the universe.
Mm.
It's releasing someone. The Course in Miracles says the warden can't leave the prison any more than the prisoner can. Stop holding people in the prison of your belief of how they should have behaved. Because as I said before, if you believe that someone in the reality of someone's guilt in whatever they did to you, then you are dooming yourself to be at the effect of what they did to you. If you are willing to know that beyond their loveless behavior is the truth of who they are, and you're willing to extend your perceptions beyond your perception of your guilt to the knowledge of their innocence because you know that God put it there, the universe recalibrates itself. I mean, that's the power of atonement and the power of forgiveness, that you literally, there's a breakthrough in synapses there. And the Course in Miracles talks about an intervention from a thought system beyond our own. And the way to do that is to be willing. So if everybody listening would just go, I think of who, there's a line in the Course that says, you can have a grievance or you can have a miracle. You cannot have both. So you think of the person or the situation that you have a grievance around. And this is so interesting for me talking to you, because, and I find, if you want a challenge to all of this, run for president.
Of course.
Okay. As a woman,
Hmm.
uh, saying what they don't want you to say.
Sure.
So this is one of those times where, I mean, you're always talking about yourself, but I really need to hear what I'm saying right now, right?
Hmm.
And the idea is the Course in Miracles says the most powerful thing you can say is, I am willing to see this differently. Because how you perceive stuff. So it's like you think of the universe as a like a GPS. So the
Hmm.
universe is both self-organizing and self-correcting. So if lovelessness has occurred, lovelessness on the part of someone else or lovelessness on your part, atoning for your part, forgiving others for theirs, it's like a GPS. It will recalibrate and the universe will correct itself, but not if you're holding on to guilt about yourself or anyone else. You can have the grievance or the miracle. You cannot have both.
What I find fascinating about you, Marianne, is that you are not only running for president, but as you're running for president, you are running on a platform of essentially love. That is unheard of in the political landscape that I can remember, at least in
Well,
American politics.
that is what Martin Luther King talked about. He said it's a time to inject a new dimension of love into the veins of human civilization. So it's actually not new. It's what
Mhm.
Gandhi was saying, and it was what Dr. King was saying.
Right, but Dr. King wasn't running for president. There's a difference. He
I
was a
think, well,
leader.
but you have to remember the historical moment.
Of course, of course. Oh no, if Dr. King would be around today, he would
Yeah.
have obviously been running for some sort of political office, without question. With all the craziness that's happening in the world, Marianne, for people who only can see that this world is falling apart, how can their own spirituality or A Course in Miracles help them deal with this turmoil that is happening in the world?
Well, there are two things I'd like to point out. One is the spiritual, which you asked about, but the other is the historical. This is not the first time things have been tough.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think a reading of history, certainly the abolitionists had desperate days.
Mhm.
And surely the women's suffragists had desperate days. And the early labor organizers had desperate days. And the civil rights workers had desperate days. So we're a little precious. We need to toughen up, buttercups here. We're not going through anything others haven't gone through.
Sure.
Although I'll admit the stakes are higher than they've ever been. But the
Mhm.
level of resistance of the old order and what the old order would do to us if we dared to challenge it was no different at any other time. So that's number one. I always feel that you look at history, it's important that we identify the problems and the shadows, but identify with the problem solvers. What were the characterological aspects? Now, this is interesting because if you look at all the great social justice movements in the United States, they were grounded in religious and spiritual principles. Among white Americans, the beginning of the abolitionist movement, it emerged from the early evangelical churches in New Hampshire.
Mhm.
A lot of the women who were the leaders of the women's suffragist movement were religious Quakers. And let's not forget that Dr. King was a Baptist preacher.
Mhm.
So what are those characterological things? This is the essence of it. The spiritual life is faith in things as yet unseen. The idea that the moral arc of the universe bends towards justice. It is long, but it bends towards justice, and we're here to be the benders of the arc. If people want to look at it from a religious perspective, yeah, we're in the middle of the crucifixion, but the resurrection is on its way. Yeah, we're in the middle of slavery in Egypt, but the promised land is out there. That's really the story of all the great religious and spiritual stories is that. Yeah, the world brings you down. No doubt about it. Nothing to be surprised about here. But that 3 days between the crucifixion and the resurrection, that 40 years between slavery and promised land has to do with the change in consciousness that brings forth the resurrection, the promised land, the historical change, abolition, women's suffrage, desegregation, and so forth. That's why Dr. King said that the desegregation of the American South was the political externalization of the goal of the civil rights movement, but that the ultimate goal is the establishment of the beloved community. Because where there is love, miracles occur naturally and the universe organizes and corrects itself. Until we get there, even if we segregate, there's going to be something else as evidence. No, okay, so we desegregated, that's great. But also now look what we have. We have mass incarceration. We
Mhm.
have other elements, that stuff's not back until we get to the root of the malevolence of heart that gives rise to such material manifestation.
Do you see that a lot of the things that have happened over the last decade or so, that the ugliness that is kind of coming up out of the dark, out of the shadows, the concept of racism, where at once it was something you whispered in the corner of a party, and now people lead with, "Hey, I'm racist," in a public forum. Do you believe that all of this has to be show that it has to come out into the light so it can be healed, so we can be kind of reckon it as a society, as a consciousness to reckon with these ideas and then hopefully put light on them?
On one hand, there is a line even in the Course that you cannot bring the light to the darkness must be brought to the light. But
Right.
if the darkness is brought to the light and then not surrendered for healing, it doesn't automatically heal. It could just become bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger.
Mm.
So when I was growing up, what you're saying is so true. It's not like there weren't racists, there weren't homophobes, there weren't anti-Semites and so forth.
Sure.
It was, the effort was always to keep those things asymptomatic.
Mhm.
Not that they ever always were, but nothing like the explosion of today, but
Hmm.
there was a sense of guardrails.
Right.
And you had a sense, first of all, there seemed to be a general consensus we're not supposed to be those things. And number two,
Right.
there was definitely a sense that no major political party would give a megaphone to such voices as that.
Mm.
And then two things happened, and they happened almost simultaneously, and they've caused all hell to break loose. Number one, the internet and social media, which gives the most vile voices a megaphone and a platform, and a particular malignant narcissist
Hmm.
who's not above stoking all of those things for his own political purposes, because his son-in-law suggested it would be a way to become president.
But
But
is
the
this part is this
other,
part of the healing process though, is the question. Like you were
I'm sorry,
saying,
what'd you say?
is it part of the healing process? Like you were saying, you know, this is happening now, but the crucifixion is now, but the resurrection's coming around the corner.
You
What
got
do
to
you
be
think?
careful because the symbolic 3 years could be 3 years. It could also be 3,000
Word.
years if we're not careful. Will it ultimately come back around to love? Yes. But remember, there were people who said, go in and vote for Hitler because everybody will see how bad it is.
Mm.
So not
It's
necessarily.
dangerous.
This is where
Yeah.
human will comes in. So what's fated
Hmm.
is that ultimately there will be this return to love. What free will determines is how long this is going to take, and we should not kid ourselves. It's like when my environmentalist friends, I remember somebody said to me once, Marianne, you don't have to be so upset about climate change, because let me tell you something. If it gets bad enough, the earth is just going to kick off this predatory species for a couple 100,000 years, so it's all going to be okay. Then you think about the level of human and other species suffering
Mm.
that would occur, all of the genius, the brilliance, and the beauty of human civilization destroyed. And something in you says, no, not on my watch. And
Mm.
that's the moment we have to get to. And that's the shift, not only for us spiritually,
Hmm.
but just in terms of our social maturity, to go from, oh, that's not good and I don't agree with it, to not on my watch. And that was the critical mass, the difference with abolition,
Hmm.
women's suffrage, civil rights. When you go from, oh, that's really terrible and I don't agree with it, to not on my watch.
I have to ask you, how do you stay grounded spiritually going through this process of running for president? Because the energy that is coming towards you is pretty intense, both in the positive and in the negative.
Yeah.
How do you stay grounded? How do you continue to keep moving forward in that environment?
Somebody said to me the other day, Roger Walsh said, you're a Rorschach test. Um, I never experienced anything like that in my career before this. The emotional highs and lows
Mm.
are, even for me, astrological sign is Cancerian, so I understand moodiness, and my response would be, well, I meditate in the morning, I do the Course in Miracles workbook, I do TM. But this is just, it's like this sometimes in the space of a um short period of time. But I have lived enough to know, uh, remember that movie Sideways?
Of course. Yeah.
And remember something about, or did you drink is that where the whole drink and dial thing came from? I can't
I think
remember.
so. I think so.
So
Yeah, I
he said,
think
are
so.
you, there was a Merlot thing, uh, to not text, not tweet, not
Well, you're
say anything while you're feeling this way.
right.
That's a big one. Because literally running for president, anything, you have one sentence where, okay, maybe I shouldn't have
Hmm.
said it that way. Put on the internet, put on TikTok, viral to 1 million people, and you
Hmm.
lost support because people conclude from that you think this.
Right.
And a lot of irrational animus towards me, irrational, uh, gives me a lot more feeling about Hillary Clinton.
Mm.
I mean, I was a big Bernie person, and I certainly came to have divergent political opinions from Hillary,
Mm.
but I never understood the personal animus towards her. I just was like, no, I don't agree with that. She's gone one direction, I've gone another.
Hmm.
But I didn't feel the need for personal animus, particularly because I'm old enough to remember when the Clintons started and kind of the
Sure.
personality she had before she became so tough. And also you come to understand why she became tough in
Hmm.
terms of the energy coming at her. Um, it's difficult not to take it personally. People say don't take it personally, but it's so hard. I see the guys are better at that.
Mm.
I heard Nikki Haley say the other day on TV something like, well, I'm not thin skinned. I don't take it personally. That's what I've got to work on because it's painful.
I'm going to ask you a few questions to ask all of my guests. What is your definition of living a fulfilled life?
Peace that comes from being able to look in at yourself in the mirror at the end of the day and knowing you did your best.
If you had a,
Somebody's life is better today because of something you did or said.
if you had a chance to go back in time and talk to little Marianne, what advice would you give her?
Relax. And also, and this is a big thing for older women.
Hmm.
It's a big thing among older women that we look at pictures of ourselves when we were in our 20s and 30s, even 40s, and we go, I thought that was inadequate. So a lot of younger women, older women are like, you looked so much better than you think you do. And that's, of course, is exacerbated now. I mean, I'm really worried about the
Oh,
young and girls and the internet and the, you know,
hey, but don't go too far, guys. I mean, guys are falling for that as well. I remember looking back in my 20s or pictures when I was a teenager, and I remember what I thought of myself back then. And
and
I'm
now you
like, are
look at
you
a picture, you go kind of, I was kind of cute.
I
Yeah.
was like, man, I would have killed for that
I
body
know,
fat.
I know, I know, I know. Okay, so that's not just women.
Oh
Yeah, just
no.
relax. And also, you know, I do love talking to younger women. I talk to younger women a lot. And I don't think any phase of life is better than another.
Mm.
And I look at younger women. I was talking to a young friend of mine, and she's in her 30s, the other day. I look at younger women. They have things I don't have anymore,
Mm.
but I have things they don't have yet.
Right.
So I'm at peace with that for myself.
Right.
But I do remind them a lot. I know you can't believe this, but that will not last forever.
Mm.
Enjoy every minute of it. Enjoy every minute of it because it's not going to last forever. And I remember when my sister died. My sister died
Mm.
very young, 44. And people ask me about my sister, and I would say, my regret is not just that I didn't know her longer, but that I didn't know her better. That I didn't, I remember on my sister's deathbed, it was like a day or so before she died. And I'm sitting here, my sister's there, my brother's at the end of the bed. She's sitting up in her bed, and my sister had that kind of Buddha light around her before she died that a lot of I've seen around dying people before. And she was in this calm, really altered, beautiful place. And I'm crying, and my brother, I mean, it's tough. And I had this, I said, we forgot to do it. I had this recognition. She was my sister, he was my brother. We were siblings in this lifetime. And we hadn't sucked the juice out of all that that could mean and all the things we could have been to one another. Like if I had called my sister at that time in our lives and I'd said, why don't you and Peter and I go out to dinner tonight? She would say, I don't want to dinner with you. I've got 3 little girls at home. What are you talking about? You know what I'm saying? And I
Hmm.
forgot that we forgot. It was almost like we forgot to do it. And my brother totally understood what I was saying and he nodded his head. And then my sister said, it's okay. We're doing it right now.
Mm. That's beautiful. How do you define God or source energy?
The Course in Miracles says love is beyond what can be taught. Uh, but it says the Course does not aim at teaching the meaning of love, for that is beyond what can be taught. It aims to remove the barriers to the awareness of love's presence. All words are but symbols, but all of us have been there. Usually it's somebody's breast. It was your mother's breast, your father's breast, or your lover's breast. We've had those moments. That was it.
What is love?
Who we are. All that
And,
matters.
and what is the ultimate purpose of life?
The purpose of life is the healing of this world. You know, in Judaism, there's the term tikkun olam, to repair the world, to make ourselves available. Use my hands, use my feet, use me, use whatever my skill set is. Might be a podcast, it might be writing a book, it might be running for office, it might be having a child, it might be getting married. I think citizenship is an aspect of a shared assignment. I think, you know, in the human body, one sperm and egg come together, sometimes more, right? And out of that comes this multiplication of cells. And there's a natural intelligence within every cell. And they start multiplying and traveling, and they become eyeballs and fingernails and liver and heart and skin and hair. The cells know what to do. And they are led to one another, because then the cells collaborate with one another to form the heart, the stomach, the abdomen. And then they keep collaborating, just like your cells in your body right now collaborating, so that you can breathe, so that you can see, so that you can hear. Now, every once in a while, cells disconnect from their collaborative purpose. They go insane. They forget that they're not here for themselves. They forget that they're here to collaborate with other cells to serve the organ that serves the highest functioning of the whole. Mm-hmm. And instead they go off by themselves. I don't want to serve the liver. I want to go do my own thing. And I'm going to get other cells who are similarly only wanting to do our thing. And that's a malignancy. Mm. It's a malignancy in the body, and it's a malignancy in consciousness. That is what has happened to the human race. We've been infected by a malignant consciousness. And that consciousness is, it's all about me. And anytime you see it, whether you see it in politics, whether you see it in pseudo-spirituality, it's all about me. Mm. That's the cancer. And we are here to heal from that.
Now, where can people find out more about you and the work that you're doing in this world?
Thank you. Marianne2024.com for the political. Marianne2024.com. And also for people who are interested in all of the spiritual, since this is a podcast that deals with that, go to Marianne.com. And I'm around.
And do you have any parting messages for the audience?
Thank you. Thank you to those who have supported my campaign so far. I hope that those who see the urgency of turning things around and giving birth to a better world, and who see that you can't leave politics out of that. I hope that people will go to Marianne2024.com, support the campaign in any way possible. If we, you know, when it comes to our consciousness and spirituality, there's nothing we've touched that we haven't transformed. We've transformed the conversation around healing. We've transformed the conversation around education. We've transformed the conversation around the body. We've transformed the conversation of everything. The only reason we haven't transformed politics is because we haven't gone there yet. Mm. So I hope those who feel that a more transformational, heart-centered politics is the way to make a radical turnaround in another direction and an openness to a better, more beautiful world, will check out my candidacy and do what they can to help.
Marianne, thank you so much for this amazing conversation. I hope it helps somebody out there watching. So I appreciate you and what you're trying to do for the world. Thank you so much, my dear.
Right back at you. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Click on one of the videos below to continue your journey, and don't forget to subscribe.